All right, folks, buckle up, because this time we're diving headfirst into the world of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, things are about to get interesting.
You could say that again. We're talking about Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin. And to unravel this enigma, we're going deep into Mark Eglinton's book, Hero Villain Satoshi, the man who built Bitcoin.
A story full of twists and turns, that's for sure.
Now, I have to admit, when I first started reading this, I was a total crypto beer. Like I knew Bitcoin was a big deal, but all the technical stuff totally lost on me.
Well, you're not alone there, but that's the beauty of Eglinton's book, right? He takes us on this journey from being completely clueless to totally hooked.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about the tech, it was the mystery, the intrigue. Who was this Satoshi Nakamoto?
Right, this anonymous figure who drops this revolutionary technology on the world and then poof, vanishes.
And it wasn't just another attempt at digital cash that went bust, right? We had DigiCash, eGold, they came and went. But Bitcoin was different.
It captured the imagination, it challenged the status quo. Suddenly, we're not just talking about sending money online. We're talking about decentralization, transparency, a whole new financial system.
It was like the Wild West, but for money. And everyone was trying to figure out who was the mysterious sheriff in charge.
And that's where things get a little, well, let's say intense.
To put it mildly, the more popular Bitcoin became, the more everyone wanted to unmask Satoshi. It became an obsession.
Yeah, Eglinton talks about how some people went to extreme lengths, doxing, harassment, all in the name of uncovering the truth.
It's a stark reminder that even with the groundbreaking technology, the human element, with all its flaws, can rear its ugly head.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a friendly competition anymore. It became a high-stakes game with real-world consequences.
And for Eglinton, the journey took an even wilder turn when he gets an invitation to meet Calvin Ayre.
Now, for those who don't know, Ayre was a bit of a legend himself, the Bow Dog guy. Built his empire on online gambling, lived the high life.
I'm talking MTV cribs, parties, the whole 9 yards. So you can imagine my surprise when I read that even a guy like that, someone who seemingly had it all, was captivated by Bitcoin. Well, according to Eglinton, Ayre was searching for something more, something with a lasting impact. He saw in Bitcoin the potential to change the world.
Okay, now that's interesting, right? Even with all the money and success, Ayre was driven by this desire to leave his mark, to make a difference.
And that's where things take an interesting turn, because it's through Ayre that Eglinton first hears the name Craig Stephen Wright.
The self-proclaimed Satoshi Nakamoto.
The one and only, according to Ayre. He believed there was only one true Bitcoin, and Wright was its champion.
But wait, there's more. This is where the story goes from intriguing to hold on to your hats, because in 2015, articles hit the internet claiming to have uncovered evidence linking Wright to Bitcoin. Wired, Gizmodo, big names.
But the reaction was explosive. People were skeptical, calling him fake Satoshi, questioning everything. Talk about a trial by fire. Eglinton doesn't sugarcoat it. He paints this picture of Wright as a complex character, someone who seemed almost allergic to the spotlight, which, let's be honest, isn't the typical image of a tech visionary.
It's like everyone had this image in their head of who Satoshi should be, this almost mythical genius. And Wright, well, he just didn't fit the mold.
He was an enigma, that's for sure. Eglinton describes this one moment during their first meeting, Wright's awkward, uncomfortable small talk, and then suddenly he breaks into this ninja warrior dance.
It's those little details that make you realize just how complicated this whole story is.
Right, you've got this potential tech genius who also does a ninja warrior dance. It's like, what's real and what's not?
And that's the question Eglinton leaves us grappling with, at least in this part of the story. Is Wright a misunderstood genius, a clever con man, or something in between? It's like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces keep shifting. But to even begin to answer that genius or fraud, we have to look at how Wright says Bitcoin came to be.
Right, because it's not enough to just say you're Satoshi, you have to back it up. And Eglinton really gets into the weeds here. Like, Wright doesn't just claim it, he lays out this whole detailed account of his thought process, from early inspirations to specific technical choices.
And this is where it gets really interesting, especially for those who've been following the Bitcoin story for a while, because one of Wright's biggest claims is that Bitcoin wasn't actually designed to be completely anonymous, this totally untraceable system.
Yeah, that's what always blew my mind about Bitcoin, the idea that it was this decentralized, uncontrollable thing.
Right. But Wright argues the opposite. He says Bitcoin was designed to allow for government interaction, even a degree of control, which kind of goes against the grain of how many early adopters saw it.
Whoa. Okay, so he's saying Bitcoin, at its core, wasn't meant to topple governments, but to potentially work alongside them. That's a big claim.
It reframes the entire narrative. Because for many, the appeal of Bitcoin was that potential for disruption, that freedom from centralized control. So if what Wright's saying is true, it significantly changes how we understand Bitcoin's intended purpose. And it's here that those nitty-gritty technical details become really important. Remember that K1 curve we mentioned?
Vaguely. Look, I'll be honest, math and we don't always get along.
Fair enough. Basically, the K1 curve is a type of cryptography used in Bitcoin. Most people wouldn't even know it exists. But for those in the know, the specific curve chosen, it has links to, shall we say, certain intelligence agencies?
Hold on. Is this where it starts to sound like a spy thriller?
Maybe a little. The point is, it suggests that whoever created Bitcoin was not only aware of the potential for, say, government monitoring, but might have actually factored it in from the beginning.
It's kind of unsettling to think about, right? This technology held up by some as a tool of freedom, potentially having these built-in limitations.
Yeah.
Or even, dare I say, backdoors.
It raises those big, uncomfortable questions. Was it truly about decentralization, or was it about a different kind of financial system? One that could operate within existing power structures?
It's enough to make your head spin. But remember, this all hinges on I.F. Wright is telling the truth. And as Bitcoin was gaining traction, going through its awkward teenage years, so to speak, its supposed creator was nowhere to be found.
Gone dark. Eglinton speculates that Wright's personal life at the time was pretty chaotic: divorce, pressure from business dealings, the Australian tax office breathing down his neck. It's plausible he wanted to avoid the spotlight, whether consciously or not.
I mean, who needs more drama when you've got tax problems, right? But while he was laying low, the Bitcoin world wasn't exactly peaceful and quiet. In fact, things were about to get really interesting.
Enter the Bitcoin Civil War, as Eglinton so aptly puts it. Imagine Bitcoin like this brand new highway, right? As more people pile on, that highway starts to get congested. This is essentially what was happening with Bitcoin's block size, the amount of data each block on the blockchain could hold.
So picture rush hour traffic, but for digital money.
Exactly. Transactions were getting slower, fees were going up, and this is where the whole block size debate kicks off.
Okay, so break it down for us. Who was fighting whom, and what were they fighting about?
On one side, you had the big blockers who wanted to increase the block size to allow for faster, cheaper transactions. This is camp Wright and Ayer were in. They saw Bitcoin as digital cash for everyday use, something that needed to be practical and scalable.
So they wanted to widen the highway to handle more traffic. Makes sense.
Then you had the small blockers who argued that increasing the block size would compromise Bitcoin's security, potentially making it vulnerable to attacks. They favored solutions like the Lightning Network, a kind of off-ramp system built on top of the main blockchain, keeping the core protocol as is.
Got it. So same highway, but maybe adding some toll lanes to manage the flow better.
You got it. But this wasn't just some technical debate about the best way to optimize a system. It became deeply ideological.
Oh, I bet. Because we're talking about the very soul of Bitcoin, right?
Right.
What it was meant to be, who it was meant to serve.
Exactly. And as these two factions dug in, things got messy. I'm talking personal attacks, censorship, accusations of sabotage. It was a battle for the soul of Bitcoin. And all this while, the guy who supposedly created it was off, doing who knows what.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire. And this is the powder keg that Craig Wright walks back into years later, claiming his throne, so to speak. It's like something straight out of a movie. The exiled king returning to a kingdom in chaos, determined to reclaim what he believes is rightfully his. But how do you prove you're the creator of something that's, well, designed to be creatorless?
Right, it's the ultimate paradox. And this is where Wright's attempts to prove himself get, well, let's just say creative. Eglinton talks about these proof sessions Wright organized where he'd try to demonstrate that he possessed Satoshi's private keys. Think of it like the digital equivalent of finding the crown jewels hidden in plain sight.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So did he just pull out a flash drive and say, boom, here's the proof?
Not quite. It was a lot more elaborate than that. Wright actually brought in some heavy hitters from the Bitcoin world, people like Gavin Anderson, one of Bitcoin's original developers, to witness these demonstrations.
Wow, so he was serious. He wanted to convince the people who knew Bitcoin best?
Absolutely. And for a while, it seemed like he might actually pull it off. Eglinton describes how Anderson, at least initially, was convinced by what he saw. He believed Wright had signed a message using Satoshi's private key, and he even publicly stated that he believed Wright was the real deal.
Can you imagine being there? The tension in the room must have been off the charts.
Oh, I bet. But here's where things take another turn. Just when it seemed like Wright was about to definitively prove his claim, he backed out of the next step, which would have involved moving some of Satoshi's early Bitcoin, a much more concrete piece of evidence.
What? He had the chance to prove it once and for all, and he just walked away. Why?
He claimed it would violate some kind of trust, that it would expose him to all sorts of legal issues. But of course, that only fueled the skepticism, right? People started wondering if the proof session was staged, if the evidence was faked.
It's like he snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Instead of cementing his claim, his attempt backfired, and he ended up retreating from the public eye once again.
It's a classic case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe even 2 steps back. But the story doesn't end there, because that's when the Kleiman v. Wright lawsuit throws everything into chaos.
Okay, remind us who Kleiman was again and why this lawsuit was such a big deal.
Right, so Ira Kleiman was the brother of Wright's late friend and business associate, Dave Kleiman. He accused Wright of essentially stealing a massive amount of Bitcoin. We're talking potentially millions, maybe even billions of dollars worth that they had mined together in the early days.
So, not only was Wright battling for control of Bitcoin's narrative, but now he's also in a legal battle royale over a potential fortune. Talk about high stakes.
Exactly, and this lawsuit forced Wright to, shall we say, put his money where his mouth was. He had to provide more concrete evidence, bring in more witnesses, and really flesh out the details of his early involvement with Bitcoin. And some of what came out was pretty convincing, I have to admit.
Well, like what?
Well, for instance, Eglinton talks about this guy, Robert Jenkins, who worked with Wright back in the 90s. Jenkins vividly remembers conversations they had about digital currencies, ideas that sound an awful lot like Bitcoin. Then there's Shoaib Yusuf, a businessman who claims he saw Wright's early Bitcoin mining operation in Australia. We're talking warehouses full of computers running around the clock, generating those early Bitcoins.
Okay, so that's actual tangible evidence of Wright being involved in the early days.
Yeah.
But was it enough to convince the skeptics?
That's the million-dollar question, or should I say the billion-dollar question. Because even with those accounts, those nagging doubts remained. Were these memories accurate? Was there a possibility of, let's just say, creative storytelling? The plaintiff's lawyers raised serious concerns about forged documents, inconsistencies in Wright's timelines, that smoking gun, that irrefutable proof. It just wasn't there.
So more questions than answers. It's like the more we learn, the less clear everything becomes.
That's the nature of this story. And it seems the more Wright tried to assert control, the messier things got. Eglinton describes him becoming increasingly paranoid, lashing out at critics, doubling down on his version of events, even as the waters got muddier.
It's almost Shakespearean. The supposed king driven to madness by the weight of his own crown. But we can't forget about the Hadlanat case in Norway, right? Because that seemed to be a turning point for Wright in this whole saga.
Absolutely. The Hadlanat case, another legal battle Wright got embroiled in, provided yet another platform to present his case. And what's fascinating about this one is the strength of the witness testimony. These weren't just vague recollections or hearsay. They were detailed, personal accounts of interactions with Wright, corroborating key aspects of his story. People who had worked with him, known him for years. They described a brilliant but troubled mind, someone entirely capable of creating Bitcoin, but also prone to self-sabotage.
So it's like every layer we peel back just adds more complexity to the puzzle. Were these people telling the truth? Were they manipulated? We're left with these unsettling questions.
And that's the beauty of Eglinton's book. He doesn't offer easy answers. He presents the evidence, the conflicting accounts, the sheer strangeness of it all, and allows us, the readers, to wrestle with it ourselves.
So where does that leave us? Is Craig right, Satoshi Nakamoto? Is he a misunderstood genius, a skilled con man, or something in between? Honestly, after this deep dive, I'm more perplexed than when we started. But you know what? That's okay.
It is okay. Because the story of Satoshi Nakamoto is more than just a whodunit. It's about the nature of truth itself, especially in the age of digital information.
Right. It makes you question everything you see and hear, especially in the online world.
And that's something worth thinking about. Because regardless of whether Wright is or isn't Satoshi, his story highlights the very real human drama playing out against the backdrop of this revolutionary technology. It's about ambition, betrayal, the allure of fame, and the burden of a secret that can't stay buried forever.
It's a powerful reminder that even in the world of ones and zeros, Human nature always finds a way to complicate things.
Exactly. And that, I think, is what makes this story so enduringly fascinating.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've stirred up enough intrigue for one day. If you're as captivated by this story as we are, do yourself a favor and pick up a copy of Hero Villain Satoshi, The Man Who Built Bitcoin by Mark Eglinton. It's a wild ride, and you might just come away with your own theory about the true identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. Until next time, keep those thinking caps on, and remember, sometimes the most intriguing mysteries are the ones without easy answers.